approve the agenda that was sent out this morning, I believe.
Yep. So move.
Second.
Was that Cole? All right. Any discussion? Any discussion? Okay, all those in favor of approving the agenda signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All right. Nobody disapproves. Motion carried. Okay, the agenda has been approved. And so our first item on the agenda is the consent agenda. It includes the agenda for today and also the meeting minutes from March 11th. Do we have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So move.
Jenny again? Who was the second?
I'll second.
Second.
Desi got it. Okay.
Desi got it this
Motion is
time.
second. Any discussion? Any discussion? Any discussion? All those in favor of approving the consent agenda signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, motion carried. Next item is item 2, which is the operational update, and then 2A gap RFP. Caitlin, you can go back.
Okay, I'm gonna just go ahead and share my screen real quickly. Can you all see my screen?
Coming up.
Looks like it's loading. There we
Yep.
go.
Okay.
Yep, you're good, Steph.
Okay. All right, so we'll start off with our operational update. We did get permission from the board to take a look at GAP products and taking that out to bid. There aren't that many GAP carriers out there, so it's a very limited market. So we went to 3 carriers, 2 of which declined to quote. And then Fidelity quoted, which was actually one of the better vendors that's out there. But unfortunately, they do not offer a fully voluntary product. What we're currently offering for NDPHIT is a fully voluntary product paid for 100% by the employees if they choose the GAP coverage. Fidelity did quote, however, they do require a 50% employer contribution on the single employee policy to offer the product. I did not provide any rates in today's presentation because we're still waiting on a final quote from Transamerica. So until we know what the final rates will be, I didn't put together a spread to do a comparison yet. And so the other thing I was kind of concerned about is the fact that it requires a 50% employer contribution. And in today's current environment with the budget limitations and everything increasing, this may be a non-starter just from the perspective of it requires that 50% employer contribution on the single only rate to get started. I'm more than happy in September or October when we get the Transamerica renewal to do the spreadsheet to show you what the difference is and what it looks like. And maybe it's not as much of an issue for this year, but when we move to the standardized plans, the GAP product may become more important for offsetting those out-of-pocket costs and those out-of-pocket expenses. But that's where we're at, in that we don't have a truly apples to apples comparison or solution available with this product.
Stephanie, can you just dumb it down a little bit for me? They require a 50% employer contribution on a single employee policy to offer.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if we offer 100%.
If you pay for it, you pay for the GAP. This is for the GAP product premium.
Only for the GAP. You're not talking about single health insurance plan.
No, we're talking about if you're going to offer the GAP product, you as the employer have to pay 50% of the GAP product's premium of the single rate. So for example, if the single rate were $20, you would have to pay $10 of that $20 rate for anyone who elected it. Now, election would still be voluntary. So if only 3 employees elected the product, there's $30 for the premium on a monthly basis. But if you're paying 50% of that premium, you might find that more employees take the coverage, which is why they want the employer to contribute to the cost. And then that's why it's set up that way, because they just don't see enough participation in the GAP product when the employee has to bear 100% of the burden of the cost.
And you said we'll get some rates down the road.
From
right?
Transamerica closer to renewal, September, October. Yep.
But
So we'll be able
Fidelity,
to do a side-by-side comparison at that point. But
and then Fidelity, you'll have that at that time.
mhm,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay.
And Fidelity does offer, a pharmaceutical benefit with their product, and we'll get into it more when we do the full comparison. But even then, it's not necessarily going to work for all groups or all plans. So, but we'll get more information as we get closer. It's just my concern is if it requires 50% employer contribution, it may not be the best choice to move to, and we may just renew with Trans. But we'll keep our eye on that.
Jeff, you haven't heard anything from Transamerica about them having that kind of a requirement, have you?
No, they don't.
Okay.
Yeah, they don't. We're on a 100% voluntary program that we're offering currently.
I think I don't want to keep talking about this, but like for us, as we navigate increasing those out-of-pocket maxes, and again, it's a different world in schools. We're going to have to negotiate. So I wouldn't be opposed to paying, from the employer side. That seems interesting. It might be a way to, anyway. So
It might be a way to help offset, and it's a better
Yeah,
message if you
yeah,
are
I mean-
contributing. Yeah.
so I'd be interested in that. Okay.
Okay. Yeah, we'll bring it forward. And again, we're still waiting on Transamerica. They have told us that a renewal increase is likely. So we'll get you that information as we get closer to September, October, and they get us that data. All right, so the Medallis contract, the Medallis contract is in process. We're still working through. I know Angie had sent some of the contract language to the attorney to review. Those notes have been sent back. It's just this time, it's just one of those processes where it just takes time to review everything and make sure all the dots are dotted and the I's are dotted, the T's are crossed. But in the meantime, we're still moving forward with Medallis, and the screenings so far this year have gone really, really well. The feedback we've received has been positive. It's a much more organized process, a much more fluid process from that respect. They just have it working much better. We did recently hold a webinar with Blue Cross Blue Shield and Medallis to just remind employer groups that, hey, Blue Cross Blue Shield has this rewards platform. And that's why we've plugged in this on-site screening to help you get that $150 gift card as part of your rewards for seeing a physician. But then the other thing is that Medallis is going to be, sort of the umbrella provider for all things wellness. And in that process, we've talked with Medallis about branding an NDPHIT wellness program. So it's not just the rewards that are offered through Blue Cross, but Digby Health could be considered part of your wellness program. Bree Health, which the EAP can be considered part of your wellness program. You have all of these other vendors and products. And so we're working with Medallis to pull all of this information together and start branding it as the NDPHIT Health 360, which is powered by Medallis. And the groundwork for that is just really, really fresh. The foundation has not been set yet. So we're working on the plans and what that looks like and how it's going to look moving forward. But we're hoping to leverage the resources that Medallis brings to the table and then use the communications aspect of it to market more effectively everything that NDPHIT is providing to membership outside of just your $250, wellness reward program, but all of the tools and resources that NDPHIT has put together in the benefits umbrella, and structure that as a targeted wellness program for all of the membership. Any questions on that? That brings us to Highlight Health. At our last board meeting, the board did approve us to move forward with the implementation of Highlight Health. We're still working on that. We do have a conference call scheduled with Blue Cross Blue Shield this week, I believe, where we're going to continue to move this forward. I know Randy's had a couple of conversations with them already, and they want to talk to Highlight Health. We're going to get Highlight Health and Blue Cross together in the same room and let them, on the same call, and let them answer any questions that they have about the process, how it works, and we'll keep moving that forward until we can get it all implemented. And that brings us to, unless you've got questions on Highlight Health, that brings us to our last item, which is the market update. And I believe Randy was going to jump in on this one. I do want to say, though, if you're not aware, Blue Cross Blue Shield is merging with Cambia. So Cambia is now the parent company of Blue Cross Blue Shield of North Dakota. That is going to impact all of NDPHIT. And they're moving to the Cambia systems effective January 1 of 2027. So the January pool will be the first groups that are migrated to the Cambia platform. It won't impact our 2026 school renewals. But as of January 1, all of those groups will be migrated to Cambia. We're concerned. We're deeply concerned about this process because we've not had the best experience with Blue Cross Blue Shields when it comes to implementing new programs that we've asked for, let alone migrating entire platforms. And so we are having regular calls with the folks at Blue Cross Blue Shield, and they're getting us updates. And we're specifically asking for not only, here's what your timeline is for these things, but what is your contingency plan? What happens if the translate or if the platform doesn't migrate according to plan, and you don't have a portal where your employees can go out and pull down an ID card to give to their provider? What happens when we need ID card information and we can't access it? What happens to membership when they call into customer service and the platform's not ready to go? Because in my experience, there is never a platform migration that goes without bumps. And that I'm not worried about. There are going to be mistakes. There's going to be things that happen, but it's how you address those mistakes, right? It's how quickly you get a solution in place, or if you've already got plan B in place. And so we're trying to hold Blue Cross's feet to the fire to say, look, we know this is not going to go smoothly. It just isn't. It's massive and little things are going to happen. But what are you doing and how are you planning to respond? What are your contingency plans? And so that's what we're working with them on a weekly basis. Now, that doesn't guarantee that anything is going to be any better, but we're trying to stay ahead of it as much as we can. And then the October pools will migrate of October 1 of 2027 at the same time that we're doing the plan migrations. So the good news is that our October pools will have fewer plans to migrate. The bad news is that they're new plans, and so we don't know how that's going to impact the migration because they'll be building them brand new into the Cambia system. But for January, we're moving everything that we've already got and whatever they renew with as of January 1.
So Steph, how are we communicating that?
We're working with Blue Cross Blue Shield on what the communication strategy is, because it's also going to impact all of their book of business. So they're fully insured, they're self-funded, and then of course the trusts. And so we are going to be working with them closely because they have to come up with this communication for everyone. And that's part of the strategy in terms of how is it going to be communicated to membership as well. Yeah, great question.
So maybe just clarification on it. Blue Cross Blue Shield is becoming Cambia, or they're merging and they're still Blue Cross Blue Shield. Is it an online system you're talking about, or is it like two companies coming together?
Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, Randy, go ahead.
Oh, yeah. So I was going to actually address that. So just as a reminder, Cambia, just probably 4 or 5 months ago, Blue Cross announced that they were, it's effectively, I would say, an acquisition, combination merger into Cambia. So Cambia is, they're based out of Washington, and they cover Blue Cross Association groups of Washington, Oregon, Idaho, and Utah. So in Utah, it's they market under the name of Regents Blue Cross, and Idaho, it's Blue Shield. So each of those states has its own kind of marketing structure, but it's actually, think about it as they call it the Cambia family. And that's these different Blue Cross Association entities or locations. And so we when they made that announcement, we felt that was a good strategy and a process for Blue Cross of North Dakota to actually take. And especially since we work with Regents and we worked with the Idaho and Washington and Oregon Association groups as well for entities that operate under Cambia. So we're very, familiar with what they do and the capabilities of Cambia. They're, I would say, much more sophisticated in terms of their offering and their technology. But to Stephanie's point, it is still a process of moving it from the current platform, which they use. I think the Blue Association group out of Pennsylvania is who they're currently, that being Blue Cross of North Dakota, uses their platform. And that will be moving to the Cambia platform. So that is the challenge. But we're hopeful and confident that there'll be some good influence of the larger Cambia organization to help Blue Cross in that transition process. And we know that, for example, Cambia has a third-party administration company called HMA, and maybe we talked to Blue Cross someday that they will be able to essentially allow a lot of flexibility, like the HMA platform, where you can unbundle, stop loss and pharmacy and do true TPA services. In fact, majority of their association business in the state of Washington, which is pretty significant, just so you know, is done on more of these third-party administration platforms, and Cambia being one of them. And the reason why is because it just provides just streamlining, a lot more efficient and a better experience for the members. So we'll see, how that progresses in, the transition process. So I don't know if that answered your question, but I just wanted to give you we want to give you a little bit more context about Cambia.
So does this replace, sorry, Steve, go ahead.
What was Steve's question? I didn't hear.
Go ahead, Mike. No, sorry.
I was just going to say, so does this replace like B-Swift or am I?
No, it's think about it as the claims administration platform.
Okay.
That Blue Cross uses to pay claims and to do their provider network administration, and integrate, their PBM, Prime Therapeutics, into their pre-authorization. Anything that happens through member services is the platform. It's a really just think about it as a claims administration, operations administration system.
And it will also impact potentially programs. I believe, like, for example, Blue Cross Blue Shield of North Dakota partners with Sword Health for musculoskeletal services. And I think Cambia uses Hinge. So we might see a change in the programs as they get closer to fine-tuning all of this. We're already anticipating that the wellness program will change, because that's just what Blue Cross does. In the fourth quarter, they end up changing our wellness program. So we're already prepared to pivot if we need to. We're just, trying to stay ahead of as much as possible. So as soon as Blue Cross Blue Shield gives us any information that can be acted upon, then we'll make sure to communicate that back to the board.
The next item here, which just is market update information, which is kind of in the same conversation, is that we've obviously been meeting with many of the groups on their renewal with the increases, and I would say there's several of the school districts that, not all, have some level of budget pressures, and so we're in some cases meeting literally one group at a time to walk through what options they have, and then also speaking to a few of them as to say, well, what if we were to leave, what does the process entail? And we haven't had necessarily a lot of those, but there's been a few, and I would say that in those conversations with those groups that we've had, there's somewhat of a kind of a misunderstanding, or not really understanding how the market works at all in terms of giving pricing, especially if you're under 50 employees. Those groups that are under 50 are subjected to the ACA metal rates. And if you've ever looked at the marketplace rates with Blue Cross or Sanford, or Medica, or health partners, they're extraordinarily expensive. I think, when I've explained to them, you're free to go get whatever quote you want, but I think you're going to find that it's going to be much higher. They've asked for their loss ratio history on these groups that we've shared. That we've talked to as well. We're happy to provide that. And I think they're realizing it's much more complicated than they anticipated, and there's a lot more kind of hoops to jump through. And a lot of it, when you go metal rates, you do not get single, two-party, employee, spouse, and family rates. You literally get a person rate, and you have to multiply. And so it becomes extraordinarily expensive. Then the other thing that's kind of been part of the conversation that they share about their budgeting is there's obviously on the school district side some conversations through Levi Bachmeyer, and Levi's talked to me, and he's talked to some of the other, I think almost all the superintendents about what some of the ideas that he's been thinking about. He asked if there's potentially that there could be a study done to look at it whenever they rolled up all the groups at a state level. And it's becoming, I think, apparent, at least to me in these conversations, it's a lot more complicated even at that discussion, because a lot of these smaller school districts that do cash in lieu of use that money to recruit. So they get a budget. I'll use one example, Ellendale, they have about, I think, 40 or 45 eligible, but they only have, 10 or 12 on their plan. And so they get an allocation, for all their employees on a budget basis for health insurance. But the majority of that money is used to actually pay in kind of a subsidy to recruit people to come work there. Well, if you take that away or have a different composition of that could significantly impact a lot of the smaller school districts. Anyway, those conversations are taking place, and even if it did progress into a broader discussion at the legislative level, it's going to take probably multiple years. It's a very complicated conversation, and all you're doing is essentially and I think there's been a presumption that if you bring in a different demographic, and the school districts, I think we all would admit, we see it from our own pool, it's a different demographic, which means the cost per employee per year in the October pool is less than the January pool. We've shared that data with you. And it has to do with the political subdivisions having a different demographic. You have predominantly older individuals in the January or the political subdivisions, and they're being older and a lot more couples. They have a comorbidity condition structure associated with that demographic that just costs more. And I think there's been a presumption, well, we'll bring in the younger, healthier groups that come from school districts, predominantly female, that maybe offset the cost sufficiently into a broader pool that we might get a lower overall cost. I think that the fallacy to that potentially is the fact that when these other school districts are actually using a good portion of that money in a budget basis to recruit and pay people that money instead of for health insurance, how are you going to repurpose the money in that structure? They're going to essentially potentially lose out on all that allocation that they're getting. The other challenge is how do you might disproportionately affect the political subdivisions by coming up with that model in a negative way, where they're going to think, well, we should do something as well that maybe takes care of our situation in a budget basis. So that's why I say, the deeper it gets into a conversation, I think there's just a lot of unknowns. But I think what's kind of pushing the agenda overall in an overarching way is the adjustments that they made in the budget, from the legislative basis just recently. It's caused so much pressure, and to be anticipated as well, that everybody is looking for every way they possible. And if they feel like, hey, if I can offload this budget here and I don't have to worry about it, then that could be a good thing. The reality is, that's one component of it. Then it's actually about the administration side of all your benefits. So one of the values that we hope we're delivering with NDPHIT is the flexibility of multiple plans, and also the administration structure of it to simplify the experience for those who have to even provide or communicate the benefits. So there's kind of multiple things that that are part of this whole discussion that is occurring in the marketplace, and we're trying to be give guidance and reaching out for any group, school districts, and particularly in this renewal cycle that wants us to meet with their board, the superintendent, or the combination of everybody. We do it. We're there to be the sounding board and to provide whatever information that they're looking for that might help them navigate the discussion. But in the I would say the summary of what I see is that they're realizing that it's a lot more complicated to think about leaving NDPHIT, and the benefits that NDPHIT is actually offering, and a price point in particular that they're not going to be able to get in the open marketplace. So anyway, that we just wanted to provide that as some context for what's going on as we're having these discussions on the renewal. And the other thing that's been a byproduct of it is probably less groups, wanting to get quotes because they're unsure, coming into the pool. I think we all admit this. Our October pool renewal was higher than expected, but it's not inconsistent with what we see in almost all the groups that we have. And it's predominantly, as we said before, the high cost claimants that are driving the exposure. It's the activity level, and the dollars of those activities, or cost of claims over $25,000. They're much more frequent and many more of them. So when you get that combination, and it's at a higher overall volume per cost as well. So that's why we're talking about Highlight Health, is for that very conversation. Is there a way that we can mitigate potentially some of those high cost claims at the facility level, at least to begin with? And I will say in our initial conversations with Blue Cross about that, this is unknown territory to them, and so we actually have a call tomorrow with Highlight and Blue Cross Blue Shield to really get probably in a little bit more depth as to what the process is, and the rollout timeframe. That because NDPHIT is going to be the first group that we're going to develop at least the mechanism and the operational process that we'll present obviously to the board before we're moving forward with it. But at least we begin the conversation between the carrier and the vendor to work out a process. So with that, I'll just take any questions that anybody might have based on what I just shared.
Kevin, you came off mute. Do you have a question?
Yeah, I was just kind of piggybacking on what Randy just said about the Bachmeyer and the schools going under it. I don't know if they estimated how many schools actually don't take insurance and give the cash. If there'd have to be a statement in there like there is no, if it's all take it or leave it or something. I don't know how that would all work though.
Yeah. And Kevin, I think that's the unknown part. And I think to Levi's credit, he's tried to meet with as many school districts as he can just to get feedback. But if they plan to do a study to see if it's even feasible, there are just a lot of variables that have to be looked at, and that's just one of them, which could actually be pretty significant to especially some of these smaller school districts. Any other questions? Oh, go ahead, Steph.
Okay, that brings us to the next agenda item, which is the operational strategy portion of it. One of the operational items that we wanted to talk about today is that as these groups are starting to look at other options, right? And if they do come forward and decide to terminate, and Angie, you can jump in and correct me if I'm not saying this correctly, but there have been two situations where the trust has been faced with a terminating group. The first one was Stutzman County, and Stutzman County had sent a formal letter terminating, and we reminded them of the termination policy. At that time, if they had decided to formally terminate, then in a year's time, if they decided they wanted to come back because they didn't get a more favorable quote in the market, the response was that they would not be allowed to come back. And then we had a situation where more recently, I believe it was Valley City Parks and Rec, was looking to get a quote and terminate as well. They did not give a year's notice. And then the information that they received ended up being incorrect. And then Valley City actually had a split. So Valley City Parks and Valley City separated. And in that scenario, the decision by the board was to allow the Valley City to come back on. They were separated from Valley Parks though, so they were a completely separate group. And different than what they were originally, but they were allowed to come back onto the plan and were not charged like an additional deposit or anything like that. So we now have two different precedents set, but the scenarios were different. They did have different, information associated with the terminations. But we're looking to formalize a policy with the board so that it's a clear-cut decision when these group terminates, and it's a clear-cut pathway in responses to what happens. And Randy, you can jump in on the underwriting, but the primary consideration that we're concerned with is if a board gives us the reason we need a year's notice is because of underwriting concerns. That group's claims and that group's premiums are all considered in the underwriting process. And if that group's claims and premiums are pulled out of our underwriting and then they decide that they want to come back in, that impacts every single member group within the pool. And that looks completely different for that group. And in the case of a group that may have, a loss ratio that's unfavorable, would you want them back in the pool? And we can't make decisions that discriminate at that level. We can't say, oh, well, they've got a bad loss ratio, we can't take them back in. Not specifically that way. So the question is, what is the formal policy? And our thought process, just as a recommendation, is that if you are going to ask them to terminate a year in advance and then they don't get a better option or a better quote and they want to come back into the pool, that from an underwriting perspective, they should be re-underwritten as if they are a new group coming in, subject to the requirements of the underwriting policy as a new group. And then the next question would be, are they subject to paying a new premium or a new deposit amount to come back into the pool? So these are things to consider. We wanted to have an open discussion on this, but feel free to jump in.
Yeah, and just a little bit of context in that is that you could just, if you went with the policy idea, just say, well, you gave notice and you want to treat them like a new group and they were favorable, you could accept them. If they were unfavorable, you could say, no, we're not accepting, because we would keep criteria that would be consistent. So that does allow you that latitude if you use that as kind of your methodology, if we use that methodology. And then the only other component to it that would have to be considered is if they're under either scenario, would you want them to have to come up with a new deposit? And that makes it a little bit more onerous if you want to keep the group, because then they're having to make another deposit. Whereas if you just made the policy that you would treat it like a new group, and based on loss history, we would use our standard, and we can either say, yes, you meet the criteria and you're willing to stay, or no, you're not, it doesn't meet criteria and we're accepting that notice. And then we use the deposit information, and as long as they've complied with the other components, for their run out claim liability. And then you keep the deposit still intact for those positive groups because they already paid it once. So it could be as simple as that to make sure there's a consistency in how we approach it.
The other option would simply to be that, no, you've terminated, we're not going to reconsider you, and do a hard stop and say you'll have to apply next year. After a year, you can reapply, but you've terminated for this year, and that's a hard stop, and be done with it. So that's
Yeah,
also.
and I would say that's a little bit, a little bit more onerous, especially if they're a good performing group and you want to keep them, as opposed to, the idea you just make it consistent in the policy of a group. But go ahead if anybody has questions or thoughts about it.
Just as a reminder, the reason we decided to keep the deposit if someone would give notice was to be able to offset any off run of
Claim
claims,
liability.
correct?
Yeah, it's a terminal claim liability.
So if we would look at underwriting, the considerations of bringing them back on, could we look at it? Like, I'm just trying to think, like, let's even just take Valley City and Valley City Parks as an example. So we say you're leaving, we keep your deposit. They come back and it's just the city of Valley City. They're a good group, but maybe only used 25% of their deposit for off run of claims. I'm just throwing this out as an example. So then to make them whole, would we just want to consider the amount they used in that deposit? Or yeah, I hate for those groups that are a good risk, if you will, to penalize them doing a full deposit again. But if we had to use a portion of that deposit to pay off claim runs, I think we need to at least recoup those costs, if that makes sense.
If they stay, we're actually not using it for run out claims if they're good. That makes sense. In other words, we're just saying, oh, you're right. You gave us notice, but you're staying in the pool, and we're going to allow you to stay because we're using our criteria for underwriting. And then it's just literally, you've already made your deposit. We're not paying a claim run out because you're staying. It's only those groups that we don't, in other words, if they're performing poorly and they don't meet our underwriting standard, we actually need to keep the deposit based on the current rules for the run out liability.
So Mandy, could you go ahead?
I got a question. So in the case of Valley City, did they split up and one left?
No, they actually both stayed. They just became two different groups.
So when they originally asked to leave, Valley City Parks and Recs came to us and said, we want to stay, we want to renew, we don't want to go with Valley City. And so they have their own tax ID, they were created as their own group, they separated. And then Valley City came back and had been misquoted and received some false information.
Would
From the
we know-
marketplace, not from us, but from the market.
Okay, so when they know that they wanted to split, would we know upfront if they split, one group would be good, one group would be bad?
No, we had underwritten them as a single entity at the time.
But then
could
at
we
the
have known?
time, could we have known, like I said, if you guys split up, one of you will not qualify?
Yeah, we would have been able to forecast that liability, Kevin. So we could have taken the individuals based on their claim history, and then done a forecast and effectively we underwrote the Parks and Rec different, as a new group coming, staying on. So the answer is yes, we could have calculated that. But that was kind of an unusual situation because it's usually not two divided groups. It's usually just one entity that's going to either, decide to stay or leave. That was kind of an anomaly.
I'm just thinking out loud. If this is our 5th year or 6th year,
Going into our sixth.
so we're relatively new. There's a lot of volatility. Can we allow them one cancellation, termination, one in their term, and then after that we set something different? Because I get why they're getting quotes.
Yeah, you could do that. You could just say everybody has like you get one chance that if you give us a notice and you decide to stay, we'll let you stay. But if you do it again, then that's final. And you could still exercise the policy like I described before, and that is even the second time, if they want to stay, you underwrite them as a new group, and if they meet criteria, they can continue, and if they don't, you're out.
The concern we have is on the underwriting side of the house, because if they give us their 1 year notice of termination, we're carving their claims and their risk out of the pool. And if at the 9th hour, when we're going through the renewal process, they decide to come back into the pool and they are a bad risk, we could potentially, depending on how large the group is and how impactful their claims are, we could potentially have to re-underwrite the entire pool. Now, it's not likely if it's a small group to have that big of an impact, but even 1 or 2 percentage points makes a difference in the renewal process. So the biggest concern from our perspective, strictly financial, is if you allow a group to come back in and you've already underwritten the entire pool, at what point are you going to allow them back in where the rest of the pool isn't going to be re-underwritten?
And I would say that's probably could be more relevant if it's more of a positive risk group than it is of a negative risk group.
Well, if it's a negative risk group and you give them the 1 year gimme, like I'm saying, if you don't apply any standards and just say, well, this is your first time terminating, we're going to allow you to come back in, we still have to underwrite it. We still have to account for the risk. And if it's a bad risk, they're more likely to come back because they couldn't get a competitive quote in the market. So that's what we're having to consider in these decisions.
So if they came back in, could we add another percentage on top of their rate?
Yeah, you can. If they stayed in, you could actually underwrite them to their risk.
Mm-hmm.
Or we just don't let people back in. Once they say they're done, they're done.
Right. You've got options. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Right. That's what I'm saying is that if you don't want them, that you can pull the trigger and say you don't meet the criteria and you're gone. But if you do meet, the one thing that I'm trying to be sensitive to, if they're a good group and we want to keep them, we want that latitude to allow us to keep them.
I'm just wondering, maybe look at it from a timeline perspective. I don't know. Help me understand. So they could come at any point, but most of the time they're going to come at you when you give me my giant rate increase, and it'll be like, all right, I'm out. So I'm going to go look at this. I'm going to take my ball and go home. And so I'm just wondering, is it a timing thing where, I assume for schools, you gave us our rates when? Was it in March? I can't remember.
Yeah.
Is this a 3-month deal or is it like a 6-month deal? Or
So that's where I'm like, okay, maybe if the timing is okay, where we say, I'm out, I'm gonna go look around. Is it more of like, if it's not, to prevent the 11th hour from happening, and then all of a sudden I don't know if that's making sense. Like, is it a month?
No, this is actually a really good question, Mike. Let me tell you the why. Because we actually forecast the entire pool liability into the next year, and we don't make any changes to it. Even if someone gave us a notice, we're not changing that until the next year's claim run-in. So that, in effect, if someone left, the adjustment for that is going to happen in the subsequent year, not in the current year.
So I guess what I'm saying is, like, if we don't want to give, make it too easy for people to leave and whatever, but I don't know if I'm not sure where I stand on this, but if they're in a decent time frame, I don't think they need to pay a whole nother deposit, a timeline that fits with what we want, in the trust.
Yeah.
I don't know. There's probably
Here's a
different,
thought.
like what Kevin said, whoever said it, you give them a one-time get out of jail free card, and then as long as they're in that time frame, I don't know.
Here's a thought. If you decide to leave and you say you're going to go look for other stuff, when they say they're going to leave, you could say you are subject to another 1% increase if it negatively affects the group to add you back on. I don't know.
Well, or to Randy's point, if we're re-underwriting them and they are a bad risk, then the potential would be that we simply say you're a bad risk. You don't meet our underwriting guidelines to be added back into the pool. And that would apply a standard, that this is the standard, right? If you give them a gimme and you say you can come back with a 1% increase, to what? We haven't quoted them any rates.
Yeah.
So,
So
because
given
we
good,
didn't include them in the underwriting.
so if
That's
we
what I'm
get a,
saying.
basically, if we
When they
give,
give us the 1-year termination, we're not going to look at their claims history and we're not going to give them a renewal in March if we use the school as an example. So we don't give them a renewal in March because they gave us a 1-year termination notice and they're excluded from that pool. We don't know what the impact would be if their claims were included because we've already removed them from the equation. So if
So-
they come back in March and say, and it would have to be in March at the time that we're rolling out the underwriting, right? They'd almost have to come back in February
It's,
because they're not part of that. They're not part of that discussion. So in order for them to ask for a new quote, we would have to treat them as a new group and re-underwrite them subject to the parameters because they were never quoted a renewal to begin with after they've given us a term.
so to Cole's point, what you could do if you want to give them a 1-year, I mean, an option to kind of take that back, you would have to take place before the next renewal came out. You literally could say, you have until this next renewal if you decide that one time that you're going to do this. Because remember, we're already forecasted that whole budget for a whole cycle going forward until the very next renewal. So let's say, to Stephanie's point, they came out, let's say it was in March of this next year, you could give them that entire period as the point to say, hey, I'm going to take that back. Because that we want to stay. Because the reality is the market's not going to give them a quote that they could even look at for at least several months before they have to. So if I renew in October as a school district, I could look at kind of what they call, the rate today as to the market, but that won't be my lock-in rate until I get closer to October. So they're going to have a tough time even getting a market quote. So if you want to give them that latitude, it's like, okay, you gave us notice now for October of this year. It's your 1-year notice, that you gave us that notice for. But then you change your mind before the next renewal, and the board says you get that one-time chance for you to be reconsidered to stay in. You literally could give them, say, even it has to be prior to the to that March renewal when it comes out the subsequent year, because we've already counted all the budget in the prior renewal period that of their money and their claim liability and forecasted into the future. So it covers that time. And so we do have that, that 1-year period before the actual next renewal notices come out, which would be March of 27, that they would have the, kind of that latitude to be considered.
does that
So the
1
timeline
year,
would be if they terminate September 30th of 2026, they would have to notify us February of 2027 if they wanted to be considered in the
correct.
renewal
Yeah.
process. That would be the timeline. If you want to give them that one-time gimme.
do we
Yep.
give them do we have a hard date that they need to let us know by?
Yeah,
Oh,
that's
well,
what, yeah,
That is
It
a
would be
September.
September
that
30th.
would
Yeah.
be the hard time. That would be the
Okay.
hard, line.
Mhm.
And then that's before we would do the underwriting for the following year.
That's correct.
Right. We start our underwriting process with the October pool. We're presenting in March, so we're underwriting in March. With
So
as
they
much
have to give us
as we
that,
have.
they have to let us know before we begin that underwriting, because we will now take that into consideration for the subsequent year.
Because they're
That
not going to
seems
be
fair.
looked at if they've terminated. We're not going to pull them into the reporting and analysis that we're doing if they terminated. They will not be given a renewal rate. It will not count towards the total pool's performance.
So let's say we give them a gimme, if you will, but then what about the next time? Then what does that look like?
Right.
Well,
I'm just wondering, is it better? I always think about what's the cleanest way of doing things, right? So if you, again, throwing out for discussion,
What,
if you have a group that says we want to terminate, and in February, they're like, well, no, you know what, we really got not great rates, and so we want to stay. Okay, but then do we underwrite them again independently, even though they're in our group and they're saying they wanted to leave and now they want to stay? Do we underwrite whatever group says they want to terminate? I kind of feel like they have to have some skin in the game, right? Because if we just allow them to say, well, we're gonna terminate, and then, well, I guess we're gonna stay, but then their claims data wasn't involved or wasn't part of that, even though the underwriting is gonna be there, there's no skin in the game from their standpoint. So if we have any groups that decide they're going to terminate and they then change their mind, do we just carte blanche reevaluate that group? We underwrite that group and see if their numbers come out similar to where they were, or if they're higher or lower, whatever. And then we can make that determination, or do we give them that gimme at that point, but their rates could increase based on that underwriting? I don't know.
You could. I mean, those are the decisions that I think that need to be considered as, okay, you give them that one chance, but it could trigger a re-rate for their, based on their history, because they gave us that notice. That's like, you know what, we took this serious, and we are going to let you be reconsidered as long as you did it for this date. But at the same time, we're reserving the right now to maybe adjust your rate according to your history.
So just to hear your timeline again, and maybe Steph or Randy, I'm not sure which one gave out the time, the deadlines, but I think what's happening from a political sub standpoint, cities and counties and parks, we're in the middle of our budgets because our fiscal year, we have to have it done by August 1st or August 9th, I think, first readings. But my point though is we're doing the budgets today and we haven't really got our rates for 27. So we're kind of estimating what that might be. And our elected officials are saying, holy cow, you're going from 8 or 12 or 15% like we saw in the school October pool. You guys need to find another option to see if we can reduce this cost. So if we give our 12-month notice, let's just call it in July, and we gotta get quotes, and all of a sudden we realize they're too high, we have to make that decision if we want to go back into NDPHIT no later than March. Is that what I'm understanding?
Well, for the January pool, it's a few months later. It'd have to be before July.
So I believe the contract language says the termination is applicable for the renewal. And I'm sharing my screen, so I can't dive in to pull up the actual contract language right now, but I believe it's based off of the renewal cycle. So unless you are, if you're going to terminate, it's going to be for the renewal period, right? So you would still be considered part of the renewal process for January 1, 2027 at this point. And if you would be considered giving us if you said we're going to terminate in July for January 1, 2027, you would be subject to the penalties that are applicable in the new language that we have. So you would forfeit your deposit, and then you would have to pay the penalty percentage, et cetera. And that would be applicable January 1, 2027, if you were to terminate in July for January 1, 2027. If you were to terminate in July for a 1-year period, we would actually consider that you're still going to participate for the full 2027 period. Because and groups don't typically drop off. Now, not to say that scenario couldn't happen, but you don't usually see it unless they're merging with another group or something big changes that situation for them to go from a January to a July effective date with a total new carrier. Not to say it won't happen, but that's a completely different scenario entirely in that case, because it's an off renewal termination versus a termination during the renewal process when you know what your rates are.
So assuming it was a 12-month, notice, like you're describing, Cole, then we would do the underwriting for the political subdivisions in July. and you'd have to give us, that's why I say probably by, at least by June 1st, if you're going to stay in or leave, before we begin that underwriting for the January of the subsequent year.
Does that make sense? I know I'm just talking this through on the fly for a scenario that I haven't considered, so if I might need to think this through a little bit more.
I got a
No, it
question.
makes sense. I just think as we're getting into our budgets, depending on the size of the city, county, or parks, I mean, can't speak on behalf of schools, but with the 3% cap, you're going to start seeing elected officials telling staff to find cuts, and whether that's high deductible health plans, whatever that may be that we can offer, but you're going to get more of these requests, I have a feeling.
I got a question. So if a group says they're gonna terminate and then they decide to come back, what work is it on our end in that dead period? When they're looking, when the schools or cities are looking for different insurance, what work has to be done on our end?
I mean, what work to determine if they decide to stay? Is that what you're asking, Kevin, or if they ask to stay?
Yeah,
Well, if they ask to stay and it's, you know, again, based on the policy that's ultimately determined, and you know, that I guess that would be what would determine the work requirement on our side, is because if you want us to say, okay, you get this one time, situation, but we do have reserved the right to re-underwrite you, then that's really what we have to do, is underwrite based on the claim history, which would require potentially an adjustment in even the typical renewal that they would receive. So that's the workload.
There's workload on our end though, for Angie and myself.
Oh yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
I'm referring to that.
Yeah, from an underwriting perspective, there's definitely a workload, but we also have to build a portal. We have to make sure that their information is timely. We go through an entire renewal process that we're going through right now for our October pool. So having them give us a decision in February is because in March, we do a big member presentation and roll out, here's what your effective rate is, and here's why the pool is this way. And then we have to put together all of the renewal paperwork and have all of that documentation, all of the conference calls, all of those pieces. So if a group pulls themselves out and tries to reinsert themselves, there's an entire timeline of adding them into the pool and building out a portal, or reaffirming what their portal is going to look like going forward, and then making sure they still fall within the open enrollment window as well. So we're not just, the initial bump, the biggest impact is the underwriting. But from a workload perspective, we need them to fall into that same flow as the rest of the groups that would either be renewing or coming on as a new group, because there's an entire, 3-month implementation window that we're working on.
So let's say a school says September, we're gonna go find other insurance.
Mm-hmm.
It's a lot of work for you in that 6 months that you do. And then I come back in March and say, oh, just kidding, I'm gonna keep the same insurance. Then you have to redo everything.
We don't do anything for the 6-month window. If they're terminated, they're terminated. Our underwriter will just have to start, making a note that, hey, when I do the final underwriting, I need to pull them out, right? They will still be tracked in your claims information. They'll still be included in the claims information because they're still active for the next year, right? So we still want to include all of that information in the performance of the NDPHIT pool. They'll still be reported on in your financials. That will still be tracked and reported on. But then when we start forecasting forward, we're going to pull that data out and say, for forecasting forward, we don't have to include this chunk of risk. This risk no longer exists from a go forward basis. So that's the underwriting aspect. But then from a implementation aspect, if they pulled themselves out and then tried to reinsert themselves, they would have to reinsert themselves in the same flow as what we would go through with a new group implementation, in order to make sure that the timelines for open enrollment are still met.
So if I say I did this for 3 years, I said, I'm leaving, I'm gonna come back. Am I just a nuisance or am I doubling workload?
It would be the same workload. It would be the same.
That was my question.
Yeah, it would be the same, except as long as they fall within the timing of when we're doing the workloads. If they don't fall within the timeline, then that becomes a burden because we've tried
That's
to
if they
dial
don't-
this in for efficiencies
If
and
they
that,
don't meet the deadlines, then they don't meet the deadlines. Right?
then they're out.
Yeah,
Okay.
right?
That would
Everybody else
be, that
on
would
the
be
same
my
page?
thought. Yeah, that would be my thought. If you don't meet the deadline, it really does, it's a tumbleweed
Then
effect.
you are starting,
Snowball
over.
effect, sorry, not tumbleweed, yeah.
Then you are
Okay.
starting over.
Just,
Mhm.
just so we can kind of get a direction here for folks. I have to be done at 2:30 at hard stop. I'd prefer that we have some language in front of us. This slide has a lot of stuff on it. I'm not sure which direction we're going.
We weren't asking for a vote today. We just wanted to bring
Okay.
this as a topic. We're
Okay.
not asking for a vote. This is just to open up discussion because we would like to have something in place before we go into next year when the standard plan standardizations are required versus optional. So before we get into the October renewal next year, we should have some sort of language in place.
Would you like some, maybe a couple of options, Mike, then in terms of what we could lay out? And then now that there has been a discussion, maybe we give kind of a couple scenarios and what it means, and then it could be reconsidered as in kind of a progression to get to a decision.
Yeah, I always like to have some work. I mean, if you want that committee that's
Yeah.
done some other things to engage in that, just so we, the board
That's
doesn't
good.
have to kind of
Yeah,
labor
that's a
through
good
it all.
idea too.
But just
The other thing is, do we want legal to weigh in on this? Because if we start carving things out and start kind of like, well, if this, then that, then the language that we have that we changed in the participation agreement, are we kind of null and voiding that or making it not as effective because, well, you can do this and you can do that. There's this language, but it really doesn't count because you can actually do this too. Do we want legal to weigh in on that as well? With the options that we come up with.
Do we want legal to be on our options or just the final thing of what we vote on?
Yeah, I think it's the final, because once you
Okay.
establish the policy, then it could be reviewed at that point.
Okay.
Okay, it sounds like we have a little bit of a direction. This will come back at a future meeting and with some options. The committee will get together and review some options and bring some thoughts to the next or future meeting. Okay.
I would also suggest that and again, this just as from experience, if we do come up with a couple of different options, I would actually recommend that the legal review both options and share what the pitfalls are of each before a final decision is made, because the legal may have an aspect of it that says this might be the better option from a liability perspective, even though we might think it's the better option from generosity perspective. So after the options are shared with the committee, I would recommend that if you've picked out one or two that you like, that they be reviewed before a final decision is made. That would be my suggestion, just from experience.
Okay. So we have a direction for the termination policy. It sounds like I'm going to move us on to item 3B, which is the October accumulator.
Okay, this one has come up in discussions as we've gone through the renewal process. The current deductibles, what we refer to as accumulators, deductibles and out-of-pocket maximums, run January through December, whether you're an October policy renewal or a January pool renewal, right? And so our October schools, some of them have asked if they could move their accumulators to run with their policy renewal date versus a calendar date. So what that would mean is if I'm in October school, my policy starts October 1, and I make a plan change. My high deductible health plan has to be adjusted to $3,400 to remain compliant. So I've already met $3,300 of my out-of-pocket maximum in my high deductible health plan. As of October 1, I now have to meet an additional $100 through October, November, and December, because the accumulators run January through December. I've satisfied the $3,300. October 1 rolls in. I get credit for the $3,300, but the plan changed. So now I have to make up that additional $100. So some of the schools have asked if it's possible to simply have the accumulators run from October through September, so that when the policy renews, the accumulators also start over. So the deductible and the out-of-pocket maximum would start over at the same time. And that way you don't have that 3-month window where you might have to make up the difference on a plan design change. And then everything starts over January 1 anyway. We would still need to ask Blue Cross Blue Shield if they could do this, but administratively, if you're going to make that change, we recommend that you do it for the entire pool and don't do it on a one-off basis, because that's a liability in terms of knowing each and every group that needs to know whether or not their accumulators start over. And then that becomes a nightmare when you've got 130 different groups with 130 different accumulator periods. So when we're talking about this, if we were going to do it, we would recommend that if the decision was made, it be made for the entire October pool to move the accumulator renewal period to October 1 to line up with the policy renewal period. And I caveat that with, we have to make sure that this can actually be done by Blue Cross Blue Shield. And we have to verify that it can be done on the old and on the new platform in Cambia, because we wouldn't recommend you do this for this year. This would be a 2027 plan change. That was a lot of information. Did it make sense?
It seems to make sense for efficiency, you know, and for schools, and I would think political subs to be on the same.
Steph, this is John. How does this impact if school has a substantial plan change going into that plan standardization that requires a reset of everybody's deductibles? Because that was one of the things that happened at Seek here, is we ended up resetting our entire deductible. Everybody's reset at 0 October 1, and then they had to.
No.
No.
It was just the difference.
Yeah, they had to their deductible got reset. So how does that impact?
That's what they're trying to avoid.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
All right.
that's what they're
Yeah.
trying
That
to
makes sense. Yep.
Yeah. So, and really it's, you know, deductible and out-of-pocket maximum. So instead of having a reset at 10/1 for the new plan design, and then again, January 1 for deductibles to go back to 0 and out-of-pocket maximums to go back to 0, January 1, it would just say, we're going to January through September, you have your deductibles and your accumulators. October 1 is a new accumulation period. Everyone resets to 0 October 1. We're not giving you credit for anything accrued prior. And now we're just going to track it from October through September going forward.
That makes sense. That'll help a lot with the school plans changes.
That would just be for the medical plan.
first
The
year.
MetLife products would still run January through December. This does not touch MetLife at all. So if you
Sure.
have the dental plan, it's still a $50 deductible that's January through December. It would just be for the medical plan. So again, this doesn't have to be decided today either. We're not asking for a vote on this. We just wanted to throw this out for consideration. And if we, you know, need to put it to a vote at the next board meeting, that we can do. So
Do we want to run this through the committee as well? Or is this something?
Seems like a good idea. I mean, if there's a language component, yeah.
and we have to get confirmation that it can be done.
That was going to be my question, Steph. When could we have confirmation with Blue Cross?
We can ask them on our next meeting, but they're going to have to go back to Cambia because, again, if we did this, we wouldn't do it until October of 2027 because now we're too deep into the renewal process to do it right now. Yeah.
Okay, we're going to move on to financials. If Nora is ready. She might be muted.
Can you see my screen? Did I get it shared?
Yeah,
Okay, perfect. So we're actually, since we we didn't have a meeting, once the actuary finished with the IBNR calculation. So we're gonna look at December of 2025's first. That's why those were in the email, because we were able to get the actuary work was done, and Hunter might have to jump in on some of the things that came in, but we also got the rebate premium or the rebate receivables booked based on estimations and ones that actually had come in for previous terms. And then also there's stop loss experience refund receivable that will be in there as well. So there was a lot of changes to the December 2025 financial statement. So that's why we kind of wanted to go over them again. And again, this is delayed because the last meeting was canceled. But as you can see, IBNR actually went down. That does happen. It's happened on ours as well, but it just depends on what's happening with the markets, what the actuary is seeing, how things have developed within the claims. So they actually decreased our premium, our IBNR reserve. So that actually was a positive to our bottom line. Also, you can see the rebates receivable once those were calculated, once that came in, and then the calculations based on what the history was came in. And so then we were up to 1.4 in the rebates receivable, and then the stop loss refund for 2025 based on what was seen there as well, because 2025, October 2025 was the first year we had gotten anything. And I believe it was like September, October, Hunter, you correct me if I'm wrong, that we got that for 2024. We didn't know that was coming. So that kind of came in after the fact. So when Bailey comes and does her audit, they might end up having us do a prior period adjustment and move the 2024 stop loss refund that we got into 2024 instead of having it in 2025. But we're just showing it all here because we had gotten it after the audit was already over and didn't know what was coming. But now, based on what we've seen and how it was calculated, then that's why we also booked what we should be getting for 2025, but it'll probably first be at that same time frame in 2026. So there was a lot going on, so we wanted to make sure. So it looks like December's actual is up to almost 2.4 million, but that is because of all those different estimates and receivables, and then the IBNR actually going the positive way for us being booked. So 2025 ended up being in the positive of about $474,000. Again, all those estimations that we do first do at year end, the actuary coming in, that's kind of where those got. Other than that, like normal, our claims and everything were up in the normal level that they had been. It's just those different items are what had that significant swing at the end of 2025. So before I go to the balance sheet, does anybody have questions on that? So it ended up being good. We ended up in the positive for 2025, about that 475,000.
So we were doom and gloom, and now we're not.
Well, 2026 is not looking that great. We'll get to those next. But it definitely helps when you have all those positives coming in. And again, it is hard because Blue Cross Blue Shield on some of those rebates is still, we're a year and a half behind to actually getting them. The stop loss experience refund, like I said, that first came in either September, October of 2025 for the 2024 year. So there was such a lag on some things that we're still learning and trying to hopefully get those calculated, but hopefully going forward, trying to get those in the current year. IBNR was definitely a nice change that we weren't necessarily expecting, but it was just things that we were seeing last year when we had, that large claim with the stop loss and things like that, that took a big toll in there. So this year, not seeing some of those helped in that. So yeah, so it's still not all doom and gloom. Things happen and those positive things do happen. But it always nice is to see us back in the black at the end of the fiscal year. Oops, we'll do the balance sheet first. So as you can see, then at the end of the year, really consistent. So we went up from about 3.9 up to just under 4.4 for the operating surplus. Then when you the member deposits that are also part of the equity, just under 8.6 million in membership equity. So we do have some leeway in there and stuff, but it's one of those things what we'll see here in 2026. It has definitely been an active year again. But again, one nice thing is we are definitely very liquid. Almost all of our assets out of the 13.6, almost all of them are up in that cash and equivalents with CDs and deposit cash. But again, we're constantly sending out, millions each month too as well. So it's kind of like coming in with a premium, going out with the claims. But it's not a bad, at least it's financially stable. It's increasing year to year. It's not big bounds. It's not building that surplus real quickly, but at least it was building it year over year. Any questions on 2025? Again, the audit is coming up. I believe, Hunter, do you know when the auditors start their work?
They have pretty much started right now.
Okay.
Field work.
They are started, so I don't know what they will do, if they'll make a prior period adjustment to move some of that revenue, that stop loss revenue, and that would take us down to about even, but it would increase 2024's revenue, so the member surplus will still stay the same. April of 2026, so this is the April actual year to date is this column. As you can see, we're at 100% loss ratio. April was another high claims month. PPO is the main one, the driving force between it all. So you can see 16.3 million claims year to date there. Prescriptions are up at 4.5, so 1 million ahead of last year at the same time. So claims continue to still rise. Last year at the same time, we were at a 95% loss ratio. This year, we're at 100% loss ratio. So anything that's coming in premium is essentially almost going out right away for the stop loss premium, and then all the claims that are coming in. So we are at an underwriting loss of about $400,000 through April. We have a little bit of cash interest, about 100,000 there. So we're looking at a loss so far year to date of 300,000. That basically all came from April's loss ratio of 104%. You have a loss ratio over 100%, any expense is just eating away at your bottom line there. So it's not great news as far as that goes. Claims continue to be high, but again, sometimes that can be cyclical. We have that same thing on our end with midterm, but yeah, claims just continue to kind of pump in at high rates. And again, like you know, seeing some of them prescription being 1 million above where we were last year at the same time. Randy's talked about that in numerous presentations of his, how those costs keep affecting us and different things. So sorry, I don't have better news on that end, but 2025 news was good to end the year getting some of those adjustments in there. But then the balance sheet side of things, again, we're still up at 13.6 million in assets. Again, 10.5 about that is in cash and equivalent. So we still have the cash flow to be paying all these claims as they come through. It's just taking a little bit away from the bottom line, and membership equity is still up over 8, but it's closer to 8.3 instead of the 8.6 that we were at the end of 2025. I know that was quick, but Hunter has got more of the details on the actual calculations for some of those pharmacy receivable rebates that are booked and all of that, because he does all the hard work with that. I just kind of combine it for him. So in the review process. Any questions?
Thanks, Nora. Do we have a motion to approve the financial report?
Motion, Kevin.
Kevin?
Second, Desi.
Desi? Second. Any discussion? Any discussion? Any discussion? All those in favor of approving the financial report signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carried. Okay, we have next item of business is our next meeting. We have there's kind of some timing from Brown and Brown's perspective. So we'd like to move this June 17th meeting to the week. So if I could get you to pull your calendars out, we'd like to do that in person. And we're looking at the 24th at 10:30 a.m. if possible. Just looking to see if we could have a quorum at least, and would recommend that everybody can get there if they can. I know we're moving the meeting on you, but if we can't get a quorum, we can try to do a Zoom, but I would need to either do it on a Tuesday, or the 23rd or the 24th or the 25th. So maybe, I don't know if we want to come off mute, go into chat, say if you can be there on June 24th, 10:30 a.m.
So Chris and Sonia, I talked to both of them who are not on the meeting today, and both of them can do the 24th as well. So we do have them as two, and then yourself.
It's like Jenny, looks like Kevin can be there. we're at in Bismarck, yes. I would assume the same place, Jenny. Is that where we're
I was
gonna?
just gonna ask if Jenny, are you willing to host again or not?
Let me take a quick peek and see if we have anybody in our conference room. We'd always love to host, but let me take a quick peek and see if it's open. June 24th. It is open. It is not open anymore. We will book it.
Okay, awesome.
Maybe we could start at 10 o'clock. And then try to finish by 1 with a lunch in there. That somebody will have ready for us. Okay.
Jenny and I'll work together on that.
Angie and I'll work on that for sure. Yep.
Yeah.
It looks like, I don't know if you want to check chat, Angie, or, you'll send out a
Yeah, we definitely have a quorum for
Okay.
sure. And I think I got everybody, so.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay, our next meeting will be on June 24th, 10 a.m. Try to be done by 1 with a lunch included at the county, what's the place called? County headquarters?
Association of Counties. Yep, Association of Counties.
Okay, awesome. Okay. If there's no other business, I'll take a motion to adjourn the meeting.
So move.
Motion by Jenny,
Second.
second by Cole, I think. Okay. All right, meeting is adjourned. Thanks, guys. Have a good